Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 395. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about museums and markets and a really long canal you can skate on in the winter as we go to Ottawa.
One more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into the news stories, I do want to thank everyone who voted for the Amateur Traveler in the podcast awards that ended last week, or the voting ended last week. We'll know what happened in January. The first news story I have is an innovative move in Frankfurt, Germany. At the airport, if you happen to be getting on a plane and flying in the wintertime to a warm and sunny location, you can check your coat at the airport and pick it up when you return, so you don't have to lug your heavy coat to Tahiti. Former Black Panther William Potts, 56 years old, returned to the United States this year. What is unusual is that he returned from Cuba, which he was so anxious to get to in 1984 that he hijacked a plane to get there. He is returning to face charges of hijacking a plane, at least 20 years. He already served 15 in Cuba. In our third news story, in preparation for the Moscow Olympics, they are promoting wellness in Moscow. And now you have an option. Instead of paying to get on the subway in Moscow, you can get on by doing 30 squats. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome back to the show Michael Soncina, who's come to talk to us from Sonchy's Adventures about Ottawa, Canada. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chris.
And I say welcome back. We're not going to try and list all the different shows that Michael's done, because I think this is his 6th time back on the show, if I've got the count correctly.
But I think we can agree this is the most adventurous destination that I've ever been to.
Ottawa? I'm not sure that we will. So you are from Canada, we should say, too, before we start talking about Ottawa, but from Toronto.
Yes, and most people, I think, mistake my city for the actual capital of the country. And it's not true. Ottawa is the actual capital of Canada.
Right. Toronto is the largest city, but not the capital.
It is.
just in the same way that the capital down here in the U.S. is not the largest city. Mm-hmm. And what led you there?
Well, I was going there for a bit of a press trip with the local tourism board because I specialize in eco and adventure travel, and they had just set up an eco district, or they're going to build an eco district in downtown Ottawa, and they wanted me to come down and see it and view what they're going to be doing with it in its future.
And you say an eco district, Ottawa has the river that runs through it, or depending on what time you're going there, it has either a river or a very long skating rink that runs through this city.
The Rideau Canal is what you're speaking about. This is what freezes in the winter and people can skate on.
And so they're turning that area into more things around activities?
No. So what they're doing is they're taking the downtown core, so it's where the parliament is located and some of the more commercial areas of the city. And they're finding ways to get the local community involved in different greening and sustainability activities. So if you know what LEED certification is, this is an architectural certification that proves that your buildings are ecologically safe. So it means that you're using proper materials and the energy is being used properly and you're lowering your carbon footprint. This is one idea that they're instituting. They already have a LEED Platinum building on 180 Kent Street. And this is kind of the showboat idea of what will happen to the rest of the city. In addition to that, they want to improve kind of cohesion between the different communities in the cities by encouraging green businesses. So they're trying to find the dry cleaner that uses appropriate methods and little shops, and this will bring the communities together and encourage green business. And on top of that, they just want to overall improve the state of living in Ottawa and find more ways to promote the green activities.
Sure. And then we should say, having grown up in Canada, this is not your first trip to Ottawa.
No, it is not. Actually, most Torontonians are sent to Ottawa when they're very young, when they're about 12 or 13, because when we graduate elementary school, it's our graduation trip. And for me, it was kind of funny because I have to admit I didn't have the fondest memories of Ottawa. From what I remember, we were biking through the embassy district, and our guide told us we had to be really quiet because it was tea time, and we couldn't disturb the delegates. But now that I've gone back for a second time, this image was far, far from the truth. This was definitely a child's perspective. The city was phenomenal. It was actually more than a pleasant surprise for me.
Excellent. And so why should someone go to Ottawa?
Well, you have to remember Ottawa is a very small city, and the population is very small, but there's a lot of diversity there. There's a really strong culinary scene. Because it's the nation's capital, there's a lot of interesting museums. And the nature around Ottawa is simply breathtaking, and you can cycle around the city very easily. You can, in the summertime, go whitewater rafting and do all these really interesting activities. And it's just a nice mix. It's like small town feel with metropolitan offerings.
And the population is roughly 880,000, just so you know.
So that's quite small.
Well, it depends where you're from.
Okay, well, that's small. But I think a lot of the population in Ottawa doesn't actually live in the city. A lot of the population in Ottawa lives in suburbs on the outside. So when you go into the city center, the dynamic's a little bit different.
Okay. And what itinerary would you recommend for someone going to Ottawa?
You definitely need 3 days to go to Ottawa because you're going to need a couple of days for the museums, and there are a couple really great museums. You're going to need a couple of days to kind of have a culinary experience. I have to admit, I think I ate my way through Ottawa in a way that I shouldn't have because my pants are now feeling the weight of it. And I think you should just have a day in Ottawa to be in Ottawa, like not to have a set itinerary, to bike around or just to wander or just to kind of absorb the city. So it should be a 3-day trip with 2 days of hardcore planning and 1 day of just kind of relaxation, because Ottawa, in a sense, is a little bit of a sleepy city, and you can really enjoy that laid-back feeling if you don't overburden yourself with a heavy itinerary.
Okay, well, let's start with that day of museums. You mentioned there are a couple museums that you would recommend.
I was really, really surprised by 2 museums in the city. One with the War Museum, the Canadian War Museum, and one with the Civilization Museum. I shouldn't have been surprised by the Civilization Museum because it is the #1 museum in Canada. It gets the most attendees out of anything. But like I said, the last time I had been in Ottawa, I was very young, and when you're 12-year-old, you don't really enjoy museums. But what's so fascinating about the Civilization Museum is, A, the architecture is really, really interesting. It's meant to mimic the Canadian Shield. And it's positioned in a way that before you enter into the actual building, you get this beautiful panorama of Ottawa and the Parliament building. So it's basically put in a way to kind of give harmony between nature and an urban civilization. The architect was a half Aboriginal, So he really wanted you to feel like the museum was one with nature.
Okay.
And when you walk in, you go in through the middle floor and you have two options to where you want to travel. Either go down to the main floor, which is filled with Aboriginal exhibits and various information there. And what's really cool about the museum is that they brought in the different tribes to create the different exhibits. So if you see a log cabin there, it was created by that tribe in that traditional way. So you really do get to see the traditional methods of building and costume that related to the actual First Nations that they're representing. And on the other floor, there's a recreation of an old Canadian pioneer village. There was a hall of famous Canadians. So if you really are into history, this is a great place to go because you learn who various prime ministers were and what their role in the country was. And while I was there, I was very lucky because there was a temporary exhibit about voodoo, which I know isn't very Canadian, but it was really well put together. And it was meant to kind of demystify the
mystery.
Yeah, well, we associate voodoo with being something very negative. Mm-hmm. This was meant to break the taboo and show you that it's just a religion. This is how the people who practice it feel. It's not about voodoo dolls and curses. It's a relationship that the followers have with the dead and the spirits, and how it's really a positive thing that just has kind of a dark representation.
Okay.
The museum in itself is really great, and you need about 2 hours, I would say, to see it properly. And it's a fantastic place to go to learn about Canadian Aboriginal culture and just kind of early Canadian culture. They also put a new restaurant in, which has some kind of shishi foods. I didn't know what confit was until I went to Ottawa because they have a lot of dishes that are confit. I had to sit at a restaurant one day and Google it because I didn't want to sound like an idiot to ask the waiter. So it basically means cooked in its own fat. But This is, to me, it represented like a posh type of meal, but it actually is quite good. But I was really, really impressed by the War Museum. I know I've heard you say on past podcasts that you really liked the museum in Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, right?
I really liked the contents of the museum, although it really needs somebody who knows how to organize things to reorganize it. But
so I had a hard time in that museum because it was very text heavy.
Yes.
And I've also seen war museums in Hiroshima. I've also seen war museums in Slovenia. I've seen war museums in various countries in Vietnam. But maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm Canadian, but this one was by far the best war museum I've ever seen. Maybe because I'm an eco buff, the architecture really spoke to me. The building is made to be an ecological wonder. They have a green roof. And
when you say a green roof, you mean a living roof,
yes.
Lawn basically on the top of the building.
Yeah, they have grass. They have The guy was joking that their biggest problem with the roof is rodents. That somehow the mice seem to get to the top, so everyone wants to live on the roof, I guess. And the system runs on river water, so it's kind of interesting. But the architect was Raymond Murayama, and he basically wanted you to recreate the feeling of being in war. So when you walk into the lobby, the floor is unbalanced to make you feel disorientated because soldiers felt disorientated. There's a line bisecting the museum that on November 11th, a light beams directly onto the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. There's braille all over it that have the name of the museum written out. And there's all sorts of Morse code that represents peace. The museum is very strong in the peace theme. But the permanent exhibit is absolutely amazing with replicas of old uniforms. They have a lot of interactive exhibits, like a trench you could go through. They also have the boat of Normandy, so you can feel it moving. And there's a video showing with the bullets ricocheting off the end of the boat. And for me, what I really liked is because I have a really low attention span. I think if you and me were to travel, we would be at odds with each other because I can only read things for a short period of time before I move on to something else. And what the museum has done, which is really interesting, is they have 3 levels of text on each exhibit. They have a bolded headline for those people like me who like to skim through until they find something that really piques their interest. Then they have a little more information, and then the last explanation is in depth. And this way they can reach 3 kinds of visitor. And for me, I really appreciated this. But like I said, the exhibit was really interesting because it starts in Aboriginal time and it ends in modern warfare. And then there's a LeBron gallery, which has all these tanks and artilleries which were involved in wars that Canada participated in. So it has something for everybody. I was lucky enough to be taken into the vaults, which you can do if you get an organized tour, to my understanding, and you can see how the museum categorizes everything. So if you're a big army buff, which I am and I'm not, you really would enjoy the museum. But just it's kind of like a triple score: the beautiful architecture, the kind of the interesting feeling that the museum gives you, and the exhibits were quite extraordinary.
And then you mentioned the light that is shining on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier on November 11th. And I'm not sure that everyone catches the historical reference there, but World War I ends at 11/11 on November 11th.
Yeah.
And so that's why, for instance, the U.S. celebrates Veterans Day on November 11th. And I bring that up because I will actually be in Flanders, in Belgium, for November 11th as they start to commemorate the 100th anniversary of World War I starting next year.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah, and we will probably hear more about that on the podcast. So,
Woohoo! Yeah, so like I said, the museum is interesting, and I definitely think you should spend. I was there for an hour and a half, and even with me with my low attention span, that wasn't nearly enough time to absorb what I wanted to absorb. So, between that museum and the Civilization Museum, you're investing quite a bit of time into the city. So, if you're a museum goer, you definitely need to go to those two. Another two good museums in the city is the Nature Museum, which is a little bit easier to get through because there's less to see, but it has really interesting recreations of dinosaurs, and there's taxidermied birds and mammals. So for children, it's kind of more interesting because they can interact with binoculars and such to see the various animals, and it's a little bit of an easier walk through. When I was there, there was a special exhibit on frogs, which was kind of interesting, and about ants. But I would say prioritize the first two museums. And I'm only saying that because you're often asking about what the Lonely Planet suggests.
Yep.
And the Lonely Planet suggests that Nature Museum, if you were there on a 3-day itinerary. And in my opinion, it's nice. It's great. Like, I think you should see it, but only after you've seen the War and the Civilization Museum.
Okay. And you said there was a fourth museum.
Yeah, so it's the National Gallery. So it's an art gallery.
Okay.
And it was really cool. It's not a huge gallery in terms of exhibits, but I'll go through different nouveau art and old art. I don't know. I'm not an art expert. The pictures were pretty. I enjoy art. I'll admit this, but I don't understand art. So I'll give it an hour or two to wander through the museum, and I quite enjoyed it. There was an exhibit there about the death of film, and it was viewing all the old Kodak factories and kind of where they are now in present day, and Kodak Field and things, and how it has gone into disrepair as film has become less and less valuable in our modern society. So the special exhibit was really interesting. They also had another exhibit where various countries were doing folk tales in artistic manners, and that was really interesting too. So I would highly recommend looking at what the special exhibits are when you get to Ottawa, because the special exhibits in these museums were extraordinary. But once again, you should only go to the Nature Museum and the National Gallery, I think, after you've seen the War and the Civilization.
Okay. And then you mentioned that your second day you would focus on cuisine. I
think the perfect way to do it would be to mix it.
I'm sure. But
go in the morning to see the museums and then go have something to eat after.
I wasn't going to go without food for a day, so I was...
Sorry. So there's a lot of different restaurants in Ottawa, and a lot of them are focused in the Byward Market, it's called. And this is a little bit in the downtown area, and it's a little bit of a bohemian and historical area. There's open markets where people are selling vegetables and locally made honey. There's shops there that sell cheese and such. Mm-hmm. And then there's a variety of pubs and coffee shops and things like this. And a lot of tourists who come to Ottawa seem to enjoy going to the Byward Market. I really enjoyed going to the Byward Market because a lot of your food and beer selection was there. Because in Ottawa, they brew a lot of Canadian beer, right? So you can go to these restaurants and try the local brew. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed two restaurants, one within the Byward Market and one was not. The one that I went to in the Byward Market was called the Murray Street Kitchen. It's the bistro of sorts, and they specialize in mostly meat dishes. And what's kind of unique about the restaurant is that when I was speaking to the owner, he told me that they buy the whole animal. And the reason that the menu changes every night is because every night they use a different cut of that animal. And while I was there, I had done some research before going to the restaurant. And what I had was, if you're in Canada and if you're near Montreal, you need to have something called poutine. And poutine is essentially French fries with cheese curds and gravy. And like every Canadian, I've had this multiple times. But now it's becoming very, very popular. And when I had read the Yelp reviews for the restaurant, everyone said to try the duck confit. Here's this word again, poutine. And I'm thinking, duck poutine, this sounds a little bit strange. But when I had it, of course, it was absolutely delicious.
So it's basically gourmet poutine.
Oh, yeah. I've never had poutine as good as this duck confit poutine. And then I had octopus confit with oxtail and some other garnishes. And I ended my meal with locally produced cheese and various jams. So they really do specialize in local Canadian food. in a little bit of a more gourmet sense. The beer was fantastic, and the cocktail that I had as well was fantastic. So I think it's a really good place to have Canadian food done with the restaurant's personal twist. I'm not a gourmet, and I really enjoyed the food. I generally get nervous when there's lots of ingredients in something that I'm eating, because it means I don't know what everything is. And I don't think everybody who travels is necessarily a gourmet. And the good thing about this place was that the food was fantastic. You didn't need to be a gourmet to enjoy it. And the staff was really good about explaining things to you if you had a stupid question, like what's a Saskatoon berry?
What is a Saskatoon berry?
It's a berry that looks like a grape that grows wild in Saskatoon, and they like to make jelly with it, and it tastes really good with blue cheese.
Okay.
And another place that I ate there is, as I travel, as I did a show with you before about Slovenia, and I have also been to Berlin, and vegan food seems to be becoming more and more popular around the world. The most popular restaurant in Ottawa right now is called Zen Kitchen, and it's a vegan place. And I have to admit, up until now, my experience with vegan food has been a little bit rocky, because I like meat, and for those who don't know, vegan food is like one step above vegetarian, so it generally has no animal products.
No animal products, right? No cheese, for instance, no dairy products, as well as nothing with a face dyed to.
Yeah, so there's no gelatin, there's no things like this in it. And so I had been recommended to visit this Zen Kitchen because it's supposed to be the top restaurant in Ottawa, and it was really funny because Zen Kitchen is located near Ottawa's Chinatown, and for some reason, because they had mentioned that it was the most popular restaurant in the city and all this, I was expecting like this fancy building with like a red carpet and like people lined up outside to get in. And it ends up being this little charming house on the street, which I had walked by 4 times. And I go inside, and the interior is very nice. It's an elegant house. And I spoke with the owner named Dave, and he gave me a little bit of an explanation about the food and such. And everything I had asked about the restaurant, because I wasn't really won over by the idea because I hadn't had very good experiences with vegan food. They all said that the fact that the food is vegan isn't what's important. The fact that the food is good is what's important. Whether it's vegan or not vegan, it still would be good. And when you hear people say that, you're still a little bit weary. But the food ended up being fantastic. And what he's done, Zen Kitchen, you would think that it's an Asian kind of restaurant, but they make fusion food from all over the world. So some of the food was, I had gnocchi, I had sope, which is a Mexican dish. I had curry. I had some kind of summer salad with various local and organic things, and it was all really, really, really good. It's a nice place to go because you can tell that they're very comfortable with people, and the waitresses are very polite and sociable, and the atmosphere is very calm, and it's just a nice place to go for dinner. And even if you don't like vegan food, I would still recommend trying the place because the food was phenomenal. If you're going to ask me the biggest thing that surprised me about Ottawa is that I had a lot of the best things that I ever had while traveling. That war museum was probably the best war museum I've ever visited. And I'm not saying that because the tourism board sent me there. I'm saying that genuinely. It was a really interesting experience. The Zen Kitchen was really fantastic food. He knew what wine should go with what dish I was eating. The Mexican chocolate cake that I ended the meal with, I've had these spicy chocolate cakes before, but this one was really, really good. So it's definitely worth it to go to Ottawa and hang out at that restaurant just for one evening, even if it's something that you're a little bit weary of.
Okay. And then you were also mentioning one of the things you would recommend doing is getting outside a little more in Ottawa. Obviously, what we do outside is going to depend a little bit on the season we go. You were there in late summer?
No, I was there last week, so we're in the fall. Okay. And it's a little bit cold now in Ottawa, so I wouldn't recommend the whitewater rafting and things like this. And apparently you can whitewater kayak right on the Ontario River near the city. So if you're there in the summer, that's something fun to do. But I really just enjoyed biking around. There's these beautiful bike paths around Ottawa Lake that goes over the Corktown Bridge, which is this beautiful bridge that connects Ottawa with Gatineau Island, which is where the Civilization Museum is. And on that bridge, you can get beautiful panoramas. For people who are photographers, this is a great place to get some of your shots of Parliament Building and of the museums and things like this. And if you have time, just follow these bike paths around. On a Sunday, there was a beautiful farmers market near Carleton University. On the weekend, you grab your bike and you wander around to find these farmers markets. So you bike to the universities and you eat something, or you wander around checking out the produce, and then you just kind of enjoy it for that sake. There's a lot of nice coffee shops. There's a lot of nice places just to sit down and look at the nature. So you get your bike for the day and you follow the bike path. If you go to the tourism board, they'll give you a map with all the bike paths laid out, and you just choose your route for the day. In the fall, it wasn't so cold that you couldn't do this. And on a sunny day like I had on the last day that I was there, it was probably the most fun I had that was out of an unstructured itinerary.
Okay.
You'll see. If you go to Ottawa, just Google, there's an opportunity to go bungee jumping. I saw one place. There's an opportunity to do like a water adventure. I just couldn't do it because of the season that I went in. Mm-hmm. But this is encouraging me to go back.
Nor could you go ice skating on the canal either. But
no, I could have tried to go swimming, but I think somebody probably would have protested. But walking around the canal or biking around the canal is a really beautiful experience.
And when you talk about biking around different neighborhoods, are there particular neighborhoods you would recommend?
Well, I stayed in the city center, right? Mm-hmm. And well, one of the things that I thought was interesting that the tourism board told me was that there's not really a nightlife scene in Ottawa. So my cousin lives there and I have a couple friends who live there. So I wandered around asking, like, if you're going to go to a more commercial area, where would you go? So there's Bank Street, which is a really interesting area because there's a lot of cool restaurants there and cool shops there. And it's fun to bike down because Ottawa has special zoning laws that they can't build buildings very high because they have so many Victorian and old houses. Mm-hmm. So it's fun to bike down those roads and just look at these old houses and kind of see what the city culture is. Bank Street is a little more, they would say, hipsterish. And if you go down Elgin Street, it's a little more family orientated. So if you have a nice date and you want a quiet night with your wife, you'd go down that street. I really enjoyed Somerset, which is where Chinatown was located, because I found there was a little bit nicer houses. And I like Chinatowns around the world, so the Asian decor was quite nice. And there was a lot of interesting coffee shops in that area. There was one called Art something, and it was in the back of a loading dock. This is kind of what's cool about Ottawa, is that there's all these, like, after 8 o'clock, the streets are dead. But just because it's quiet, it's more of a reflection of the population and the lifestyle. It doesn't mean that there's not cool things to do. If you're going to bike around, don't go through the neighborhoods, I would say, as much as I would go through the bike path around the Ottawa River and the bike paths around the Rideau Canal. Okay. Find out where those farmers markets are. Go to Carleton University. I heard Ottawa University is very interesting to bike around and go explore. Speaking about the nightlife, I kind of had fun on a Saturday night in Ottawa was kind of interesting. Me and my cousin went. I encouraged him to go bar hopping with me. There's a really cool speakeasy at Union 613, and you have to ask the bartender where it is, and they'll take you down to this basement, and they have these really weird drinks. I had something called a polar bear's toenail, and it was a mint chili kind of cocktail, and it was really interesting and good. And there's another place there called Shanghai's. It's a Chinese restaurant on Somerset in the Chinatown. And the guy who owns the restaurant every Saturday night dresses in drag and leads a karaoke night. And I had not seen so many people in one place in Ottawa as I had in his restaurant. And the atmosphere over there was really fun because half the people couldn't sing, as karaoke should be. If you're in Ottawa on a Saturday night, I highly recommend going to Shanghai and participating in this karaoke event because it was really cool.
And the only part of that I would disagree with is the as karaoke should be.
Okay, well, I lived in Japan for a long time, and we did a lot of karaoke. I've yet to hear everybody be fantastic.
I had a disagreement with some former coworkers who were talking about somebody being really good at karaoke, and I mentioned that they hadn't actually hit any of the notes. And they said that, but they did it with such enthusiasm, and I realized that we had just completely different ideas of what made good karaoke.
Once again, like I said, I think if me and you were to travel together for an extended period of time, we would probably get into a fight.
Never. As we go to wrap this up a little bit, you're standing in the most beautiful spot in Ottawa. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
At the Civilization Museum. Mm-hmm. There's this gap between the office building and the actual museum itself. And you get this beautiful view of the back of Parliament. And because I was there in the fall, the mountain that it was on was covered in changing leaves. You get a beautiful view of the Ottawa River. And if you saw the old $1 Canadian bill, this was the photo that was on the back of the bill. And because I'm way past the time where we had this, I didn't make this connection. But there's a reason that it's on that piece of currency because it's absolutely breathtaking.
Now, as a Torontonian, let me ask you, how can you know that you're definitely in Ottawa and not in Toronto?
When it's 7 o'clock and there's nobody on the street.
Okay, I figured that was going to be the answer there.
Also, people in Ottawa are really, 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 really friendly. Like, I've never felt such kind of warmth Torontonians are nice. I love my city people. But I've been on the subway and I've put in my earphones and wanted to not talk to anybody. Mm-hmm. In Ottawa, I never really felt that was an issue. Anywhere you go, anybody you talk to is quite willing to be conversational, and everyone is cordial.
Okay. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Ottawa.
Oh, the amount of French. I would turn around and hear people speaking French, and I realized that I was a bad Canadian because I didn't understand.
Now, I would assume I would get that more in Quebec, but there's quite a lot of the Quebecois influence then in Ottawa as well.
Gatineau Island is actually part of Quebec, and it's very close to Ottawa. And because it's our nation's capital, and actually in Canada, there's 2 official languages, of course, which is English and French. So you will hear a lot of French speakers in Ottawa.
Before I get to my last 2 questions, what else should people know before they go to Ottawa?
If you're from Toronto, you might be put off by the fact that it seems a little bit sleepy, but if you really go exploring, there are so many interesting things in the city. And I'm not a museum guy, like I said, but I really enjoyed the museums. And I'm not a gourmet food guy, but I really enjoyed the food that I ate. Do a little bit of research, find out what you like, because the city's going to have it. And really just go for it and enjoy whatever you can while you're there, because it'll be worth it.
Ottawa was actually the very first time I ate Moroccan food, and I've discovered that it's a type of food that I really enjoy. But again, one of my experience there in terms of food in Ottawa.
While we're still on the note of food, everybody who comes to Ottawa has to eat a beaver tail. Okay,
which is a pastry?
Yeah, it's like a flat donut.
Okay.
The most traditional one is with cinnamon and sugar. And my friends joke about me because I'm a kind of a donut connoisseur. I love donuts. And this thing was really nice. It's not round, it's flat and fried, but everyone who goes to Ottawa has to have one of these because it really is. If you're talking about Canadian food, beaver tails are part of Canadian food. And if you go there on the winter and you're skating on the Rideau Canal, you'll find these beaver tails all over the Rideau Canal, to my understanding. So you just got to have one. And they're easy enough to find. One's in the Byward Market.
Excellent. Finish this sentence. You really know you're in Ottawa when what?
When it's Sunday and you realize you've just had the most perfect day going to farmers markets, eating good food, and now you're sitting by the Ottawa River and enjoying just the calmness that is the city.
Okay. And if you had to describe Ottawa in 3 words, which 3 words would you use?
So I struggled with this because I was thinking about it all day. I would say this in a positive light. I'm going to say quiet, classy, and comfy.
Okay.
And only because the fact that it's quiet gives it charm. Because it's our capital, it is really classy and kind of polished. And it's comfy because everybody can find something that they'll enjoy there.
Excellent. Michael, where can people read more about your travels?
You can read about my travels at Sonchy Adventures. I'm also a contributing writer to Sunday Essentials and Travel Culture Magazine.
Excellent. And why don't you give us the URL for Sonchy Adventures, because it is not obvious.
www.sonchyadv.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the show and telling us about Ottawa.
Not a problem, Chris. I love every minute.
In News of the Community, I had asked a while back how many people were watching the photos in the enhanced podcast. I heard back from about 18 of you. 10 of you love the photos. Some of you can't imagine listening to the show without them. 2 of you like the photos, and the other 6 really just honestly never look at them. So that's interesting. That will at least give me some information as I think about what to do in the future. Again, we'll have the photos at least through the end of the year is my commitment. I got an email from Dan about the episode we did on Navajo country in Arizona a while back. It said it appeared that your guest did not spend as long in Monument Valley as it might deserve. About 10 years ago, we took a guided tour by open pickup truck of the valley that lasted perhaps an hour or 2, way better than hanging out at the visitor center and just looking. We also did a horseback tour just outside the valley, and it was pretty awesome also. Dan, thanks for that feedback. I am back from a week-long trip to Belgium, which we'll hear about a little more on the show later. And a very interesting trip as we were looking at the upcoming anniversary of World War I, and then also just enjoying the wonderful, as they call it, art cities of Belgium. So many pictures coming, at least a few articles, and probably an episode about some of the experiences that we had there. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. or leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com, or participate in the Facebook community. Again, facebook.com/amateurtraveler. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X, and as always, thanks so much for listening.
true.